I will call the May 24th, 2021 school board meeting to order. It is 7 p.m. We are in conference room C of the Fisher Administration Building at 12121 West North Avenue. Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley?
She's absent.
Dr. Jessup Anger?
Here.
Mr. Meyer?
Here.
Ms. Mufeld? Here. Mr. Phillips?
Here.
Mr. Allen?
Here.
Mr. Doman?
Here.
Ellie Katie?
Here.
Mira Garajura?
Thank you. Move on to public comment on non-agenda items. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and community members. The board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider their input in decision-making. The board requests that individuals limit their comments on each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, an individual board member may respond on the issue raised. However, it is not the intent of the public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into debate with members of the community. Because non-agenda items are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public comment regarding non-items this evening. Are there any public comments on non-agenda items?
There are no hands raised virtually.
Thank you. We have one comment in the room. State your name and address, please.
Hi, I'm Deb Falk-Palak. I live at 7435 West Wells Street. The Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction has found the Wauwatosa School District to have been in non-compliance with Individuals with Disabilities Education Act law. I have 5 comments and suggestions regarding this ruling by DPI. Number 1, thank you to the school board member who informed me that the school board had not been made aware by school district administration of DPI's finding of the district's compliance with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. I would like to suggest that the school board is always informed by administration of any non-compliance decisions rendered from the DPI or, for that matter, any regulatory body. Number 2, DPI's decision instructs a student record review be done. I would like to suggest that the school district takes proactive measures to inform parents of students in grades 8, 9, 10, and 11 who participated in the enrichment program through the rec department and were denied extended school year services of their potential right to compensatory education. No parent or guardian should have to be initiating contact to ask about their child's situation, particularly if parents have not been informed or know to ask. School board members, please keep in mind that the district is still within the 30-day time period set by DPI, and that period does not expire until next week. I respectfully encourage you as board members to follow up on this to ensure this happens for these students and their families. Number 3, DPI has instructed our school district to submit to them a corrective action plan within the same 30-day period. I would like to suggest that this corrective action plan to be given to DPI is also given by administration to the school board for the board to review and take note of for any further action to prevent harm to any future students from administrative decisions that led to this ruling. Number 4, I suggest to the board, as you have fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers of Wauwatosa, to review the amount of taxpayer money being spent in special education on attorneys. What are the issues necessitating this, and how can we make improvements? Lastly, for staff to cite equity as rationale for what really is a practice of policy in place that suppresses opportunity for special education students was one of the most preposterous things I have heard, and illustrates that we really need to have further discussion in special education around equity and other issues. For those administrators in this district who so strongly defended their inappropriate decision, which was substantiated by the DPI as inappropriate, is concerning. We need to raise children up and must find ways to do so. We absolutely must do better for marginalized students in this district, which includes those with disabilities. And I'm hopeful that together we can elevate and expedite this with concrete action items and that we can do better.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Please state your name and address.
Barbara Sweeney, 839 North 67th. I'd like to also state that my daughter has been affected by many of these rulings that are experienced here in the Wauwatosa School District for special education. Has been a long and hard road. After trying to work collegially with many of the staff and school board members, it didn't come to something that I'd like to have had for opportunities for my daughter. I feel so strongly about it that I'm not going to even exercise, or we're not going to exercise our 18 to 21 option in this district because it's been arduous. And I just want better for the students coming behind my daughter, after my daughter. If it's a legislative body and you need to be made aware, I want to be one of the parents that make you aware there's a lot of problems in the Wauwatosa Special Education Department. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on non-agenda items? All right, seeing none. Move on to recognitions. Student recognition, one of the most exciting things I think we get to do as a board. So thank you all for being here tonight. At the Georgetown Jazz Festival, the following students from East Jazz Assemble 1 were recognized as outstanding soloists. So as I read off your names, Miss Mufeld there walking across the room will have a certificate for you. So if you're here, please come up and get your certificate. Stuart Goldsmith for tenor sax. Arthur Johnson for piano. Micah Korb for guitar. Will Martin for drum set. Jacob Mosey for trombone. Arnold Ramos for trumpet. The trumpet section was also recognized as an outstanding section, and those trumpet players are Margot Nichols, Colin McCallie, Arnold Ramos again, and Kaylee Shea. Thank you all for your great work this year. We truly appreciate it. The next student recognition we have is Wisconsin Student Journalist of the Year. The board recognizes West Senior Sarah Stanislawski, who is named Wisconsin Student Journalist of the Year. We also have a staff recognition this evening. The board recognizes our own Sarah Fatita, Communications Coordinator for the Wauwatosa School District, who was honored by the Wisconsin School Public Relations Association with the Spectrum Award of Excellence for the district's 2021 school year reopening webpage. Thank you for all of your hard work. We will move on to consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda which board members would like to move for separate discussion and action?
Yes, if I may request, Mr. Doman, that we remove the buildings and grounds energy item for separate discussion and separate action.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. That item has already been removed.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Are there any other one would like to remove for separate action? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I motion. Second.
Dr. Jessup Inger, Mr. Rowan. Are there any comments on the consent agenda? Please call the roll, Ms. Newman.
Ms. Fraley, Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Mufeld? Yes. Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Dillman.
Yes. The motion passes. We'll move on to business services action items. The liability and workers' compensation insurance bid. Mr. Phillips?
Sure. It is recommended the board approve the liability and workers' compensation insurance bid from M3 Insurance attached, and I so move.
I second.
Dr. Jessup Banger? Thank you for the second. Is there any board discussion on this item?
There's one thing I'd like to bring up just as a proactive thing for us. I thought it was good that that MARTA, put services out for bid, but I think we need a policy, and I'd like to ask the board permission to research a policy that sets forth some guidelines as to when we review contracts over a certain threshold, whether it's every 2 years, every 3 years, but just start that process of gathering other board policies around that, so that we just have something in place. So when, as Ms. Kwiatkowski's here or whomever has a solid pathway to go has a schedule in place to review those major contracts on behalf of the district ongoing. So if that's good with you guys, I'd like to research that.
Any thoughts on that?
Yes, I have a comment if I may.
Mr. Meyer?
Would it be appropriate to include in that research the conflict of interest policies? I note that our current conflict of interest policy for outside contracting does not, we have a policy, but it seems rather weak compared to other school board entities. There's no requirement that the board be noticed, for example. So if we're going to look at the contracting process, maybe we could pull that in as well if you have time, Mr. Phillips, just in the name of, transparency and visibility and that, like you're saying, periodic renewal. It seems like it could all be combined into one interworking proposal.
Okay. Point noted. Thank you.
Ms. Newman can help through WASB for policy services. They can get us example policies.
Okay.
Great. Any other comments on this item or discussion? Ms. Meefield?
Thank you. I think we do have controls in place because we would be audited on that. I just want to point that out. But as far as refreshing policies and making sure all of the checks and balances are there, I think that is a good idea to do that on a regular basis. So I appreciate that that's been brought up. But again, our processes are always audited every year. So I want to be clear that this is something that we do look at every year.
Thank you, Ms. Meefield. Any other board comments on this item? Any public comments on this item?
There are no hands raised virtually.
Thank you. No further comments. Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Abstain.
Ms. Neufeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Dillman.
Yes. Up next is the East High School generator replacement. Dr. Jessup Banger?
It is recommended that the school board approve the project at East High School fully scoped bid results for generator replacement totaling $519,141, which is included in the referendum improvement budget. And I so move.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Meefield. Are there any comments on this agenda item? Seeing none, are there any public comments?
There are no hands raised virtually.
Mr. Moon, will you call the roll?
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Neufeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Dillman.
Yes. Okay, we'll move on to our teaching and learning action item. Cooperative Educational Service Agency, CISA 1 service contract. Ms. Mufeld.
Yes, thank you. It is recommended that the school board approve the service contract for the 2021-2022 school year between CISA number 1 and the Wauwatosa School District for services and personnel totaling $290,036.11, and I so move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Rowland. Any board discussion on this item? Ms. Mufeld.
Thank you. I would just ask the administration to comment on, are there any changes from prior year and or any suggestions or things you want to point out?
Thank you, Mrs. Mufeld. This is a pretty standard contract for us from year to year. We do review it to see if there are updates or changes that need to occur every year. The majority of the contract goes to support students with disabilities who require an out-of-district placement, an alternative placement for programs or services that we cannot provide here. There are also a couple of other items on the contract for networks, for administrators to engage in collaborative work with other school districts that are part of the CISA 1 network.
Thank you. Any other board comments on this item? Any community comment on this item?
There are no hands raised virtually.
Ms. Nguyen, please call the roll.
Dr. Chesapeake,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Mufeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Doman.
Yes. Motion passes. We'll move on to our teaching and learning report. And we will be receiving tonight a teaching and learning update from Ms. Bowers, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, and her team, which is all gathered here before us.
We are. We're just going to get ourselves situated here. We're lucky enough to have some of our coaches and specialists join us tonight.
Thank you all for being here tonight. It's fantastic.
It's nice to see
So if I can just start out, just to kind of frame what we're doing tonight. I know some of the board has received a few emails and there's been some discussion about presentation in relationship to our last meeting as well, but I would kind of frame this as a State of the Union or State of the District presentation. Next month will be the State of the Union, the financial part of it. This is really about teaching and learning. I think this year we probably learned more than ever what works for kids and what doesn't. And going forward, we want to double down on the things that are working. And I think that's what is going to be shared tonight. Still, our equity plan and our core principles are really what drive and always has for the last good number of years, driven what we do in our school district. And there's no major changes we're recommending tonight. This is the work we've been doing, going to continue to do, and just talk about most of all an attentional focus on our equity. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I just have a couple of things to say before we start. I know that there's a lot of data in this presentation and a lot of pages with numbers. If I could just ask the presenters, maybe as we go through the pages, just to give a little bit of time for board members, if there are questions, just to make sure we understand the numbers that are before us. I'd ask board members that we don't get into the conversation part of it until we get to the end. But if you do have questions on certain slides, just about what the data is representing, let's just make sure we're all clear on that. Maybe it's just me and others are just fine. But
There's a lot there.
it was a lot there.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that we're all understanding exactly what we're looking at. So thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm joined tonight by our directors, Nicole Marble, Mike Poralski, Therese Kwiatkowski, Jessica Ebert, and Naseef Rogers. And also our district data analyst, Michelle Anderson, two of our reading specialists, Mary Metz and Melissa Myers, and two of our instructional math coaches, Liza Weber and Wendy Domena. So tonight, the team is going to share what we've learned this year from a systemic view and how we are using what we've learned to identify strategies to propel our students forward and through the curriculum while monitoring progress and student success throughout the next year. So to do that, we have this visual here for you tonight. We're going to start by surfacing our current reality, our current state. And we're going to take a look at that data and analyze both the qualitative and quantitative data, look to identify some root causes, and learn about additional opportunities for improvement of the student learning experience as we move forward. From there, we'll create a plan of action throughout the district that's rooted in high leverage strategies to improve instructional practices and accelerate student learning. And when we talk about accelerating student learning, we mean staying really intentional with meeting students where they are and providing them what they need at that moment to experience academic success. And so tonight we'll start off with Michelle sharing what we know right now from our data, and then our directors and our instructional coaches will chime in and talk about what we're doing right now to address those just-in-time learning needs of our students, and how we'll continue to use what we've learned this year to create plans to launch the 21-22 school year.
Thank you so much for inviting me back to talk data with you. So school districts are rich in many types of data. During a typical school year, we collect data about learning from universal screeners, formative and summative classroom assessments, mastery checks, classroom work, and project-based learning assignments. Mastery of skills and subject content is regularly evaluated through course grades and practice standards. Contextual data about instruction and classroom environment is collected through classroom walkthroughs, teacher self-assessments, and observations. Students also have opportunities to set personal goals and reflect on their learning throughout the school year. Effective high-leverage data use is an ongoing multidimensional process that occurs every day throughout the school year in our district. I'm very happy to start our review of the data with some good news. Elementary students in the Wauwatosa School District did as well or better this school year as they did last year in the areas of math, reading, speaking, listening, and writing. The data shows fifth grade student achievement by math practice standard pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. In the areas of problem solving, abstract reasoning, constructing arguments, and modeling with math, students demonstrated a similar level of mastery as fifth grade students last year. Annual review of our district math data over the past few years led us to identify operations and algebraic thinking as a high priority area of need for instructional improvement. Prior to the pandemic, we were beginning to see improvements in operations and algebraic thinking thanks to this important work. Through the pandemic, we have continued to see improvement in students' operations and algebraic thinking skills across grade levels. Among elementary students, we also observed positive gains in the area of English language arts. This year's fifth grade students demonstrated a high level of mastery in text comprehension and reading accurately with expression that is comparable to the prior school year. During the 2020-21 school year, students also demonstrated growth in mastery from the first term to the second term in these important skill areas. Across all elementary grade levels, subjects, and practice standards we examined, a similar pattern emerges. Students overall are performing as well or better than last year in the essential standards for their grade level. While we may not have a traditional school year, our local assessment data shows a lot of good learning occurred in elementary classrooms across the district.
So as we think about the practice standards data that Michelle just shared with us, another way that we collect information about student learning in math is through common assessments. These common assessments are implemented across all classrooms, JK through grade 5 in the district, to measure student progress in the major work of the grade. The purpose is to identify consistent, equitable content goals that reflect our state standards and to ensure high levels of rigor across the district. This practice of administering and analyzing common assessments in math has been in place for more than 5 years, and we began formally collecting this data district-wide in Edis more than 3 years ago. However, even before students engage in these common assessments, teachers engage in a data cycle around formative assessment. This data cycle is not unique to math, though we will be specifically speaking to math right now, but know that this data cycle is used across all content areas, JK through 12. This data cycle at the classroom level.
Excuse me, Michelle, are you sharing your presentation in the Zoom session?
Is it not coming through, Jane?
Well, we don't see it. No, you have to go to the Zoom window and share screen to bring it into Zoom as well. There we go. We see it now. Thanks.
Thanks, Jane.
Excellent. That's all right. So this data cycle that you're looking at now that you can see is the data cycle that is used at the classroom level. So again, it is not unique to math, though we're talking about math right now. It is a JK through 12 process. So this data cycle at the classroom level is a process that occurs many times over the course of a week in grade level planning teams, PLCs, coaching cycles, before a common summative assessment is ever given. Teachers plan for instruction, implement those lessons, study the results of ongoing formative data, and then make adjustments based on the data they're gathering. Then the process is repeated again once the summative information has been collected. So let's look at how this cycle might work as teachers begin planning. From the start, common assessments inform the planning process by providing a consistent way for all students to demonstrate understanding of the mathematics that reflects the major work at their grade level. These assessments provide equitable and coherent expectations for learning around standards, as well as levels of academic rigor in every classroom. Teachers then plan lessons that will build students' understanding of these identified math concepts, while also increasing students' level of confidence and strengthening their identities as mathematicians. Proactively planning this type of instruction for all students includes formative assessment opportunities as well to ensure student progress toward meeting those established learning goals. Then we move to the do phase. What might this look like? As teachers implement the math instruction they've designed, they pay close attention to the math instruction that's occurring in the classroom and how students are learning. Day to day, teachers' formative assessment may vary based on the type of information that will be most useful for them to collect. This may occur through conferencing, exit tickets, observations, quizzes, the use of math practices, which we just looked at, and student contributions to student discussion. As teachers collect this data, they're responsive to student needs and are making adjustments to their instruction and providing additional practice and challenge for students so that they are well prepared to meet the proficiency expectations on the assessment. Then, once the assessment is given, teachers study and reflect on this information so they can better understand what their students know and are able to do related to the goals and the standards in the unit. They look for patterns in their class data, as well as areas of success and opportunities to strengthen their instruction in those specific content or practice standards. After the study phase, teachers move to act and adjust. This is where they determine next steps for their students based on the data they just analyzed. This may involve reteaching certain concepts, giving students more practice opportunities, and differentiating instruction to meet the needs that emerged from that data. Once these next steps are determined, we move right back into the planning phase in order to respond to the data that was collected. In this way, teachers can ensure that all students are continuing to move forward in their learning and are able to demonstrate proficiency in the goals and the standards in every unit.
Wendy just walked through the data cycle process at the classroom level. Then, on a building or district level, we engage in another data cycle to notice trends or patterns across the district as a whole. We are able to engage in this process with information from common summative assessments and additional classroom data. The past few years, our coaching team has gone through this process using discourse data aligned to a goal set at the elementary level, common assessment information, and math task assessments in grades 3 through 5. Our team considers a variety of information when determining how to strengthen mathematics teaching and learning for all students. Typically, this process at the systems level begins in the study phase. Though the data collected in the classrooms is summative for teachers, it's actually formative as we look at the data district-wide. For teachers, it's the end result as they use it to plan. But for us, this information is the starting point as we decide how to respond at a district level. The visual on the screen shows the steps of this process as we engage in a continuous improvement cycle using a variety of data sources. First, we collaborate as an instructional coaching team to understand the baseline results and to look for patterns in the data. Then, we determine what might be the most effective ways to engage others in making progress in the identified area. Next, we plan professional learning and develop ways to provide classroom feedback and coaching to support improvement in the area of focus. We implement the supports and continue to gather formative assessment data in a variety of ways, including classroom walkthroughs, teacher feedback, coaching conversations, and additional student data. This information then provides us with the opportunity to once again study and analyze growth. This process is ongoing as we continue to strive toward high levels of academic discourse and achievement in all math classrooms, and occurs at the classroom, building, and district level. Here is one example of assessment data we recently gathered and are able to study right now. This data is a sampling from one of our grade 4 Math Common summative assessments from this year. Teachers have gathered and are currently using this information in classroom level data cycles. These assessments play a crucial role in providing specific, timely data that can immediately inform classroom instruction to support our learners and teachers. Classroom assessments allow us to be reflective about our instructional practice and responsive to student needs when it matters most. On a district level, this will be part of the data that we study in order to determine next steps for the 2021-2022 school year through an ongoing continuous improvement cycle.
Okay, so a lot of these things that the math team just talked about are also true for ELA, although we're in a slightly different place in that process. So if you look at the slide here, you'll see a lot of the same themes or ideas appear. We just don't have the really cool visual that the math team came up with. But we too want to be engaged in that ongoing living process of assessment, and one that allows us to use a lot of different tools and resources and practices to really paint a picture of what our students can do. And so again, these bullet points just kind of reiterate a lot of what was just talked about. It's a driving force for our planning. It helps us reflect both at a teacher level, at a building level, at a district level, and it helps us look for those patterns and trends. And so for us, we are just finishing our first year of ELA implementation, and we are now starting to look at how to fine-tune or adapt our cycles of assessment as well. And so what you're going to see in a moment is an example of some baseline information we took during the second trimester, looking at 3rd through 5th graders' ability to summarize more complex text. And so you'll see a little bit of what that baseline looks like. And what we have realized as we analyze that data is that has painted a very clear picture of what our next steps are instructionally. And this is the type of process we hope to continue to use and refine in not just summarizing, but other areas of literacy as well. And so you'll see these same kinds of steps that we'll be trying to carry out to plan, to carry out and gather information along the way, to study the results, and to then, readjust and fine-tune that plan of action. To be able to ensure that we're really living out our goals for equity, to really walk the walk. We want to continue to make sure our kids are college and career ready. And that means fine-tuning and growing our ability to look at assessment beyond those statewide and district-wide standardized assessments. And so we want to grow into those practices of us continuing to assess daily or weekly to help teachers and coaches and staff to be able to look at that information in an ongoing, practical way so that we can align instruction to students' strengths, so that we can look at patterns and trends that tell us where the barriers are and ensure that students are getting the opportunities that they deserve. And so Michelle will pull up that slide that just shows some of our baseline. And again, this is before instruction has taken place. And so what you're seeing is kind of that pre-instruction level.
So the data I am presenting is an example of a 3rd grade common assessment in English language arts. And while this data may appear discouraging at first, it is highly informative and powerful data. Classroom assessment provides opportunities to grow and support our learners both now and into the next school year. While standardized assessments often get the glory, it is classroom assessment that really informs and evolves our practice on a day-to-day basis.
and I can speak to some of what we've learned from this assessment data. As you can see from the previous slides and the current slide, the common assessments we've implemented have given us a great deal of information for reflecting and planning forward, both as a system and in the classroom. For a moment, pause to consider what perhaps a more traditional single score would tell us about students. We would be able to determine which students meet criteria and which ones do not. When analyzing samples of student work, however, clear trends emerge that are guiding our next steps in our planning. We have great opportunities to build on the foundation students have already. For example, generally, students were thinking about main ideas and details and accessed some details to show a general understanding of what most of the texts were about. Across grades 3 through 5, more work is needed in preparing teachers and students for the ways of thinking that will be necessary in understanding the rigorous complexities of the text. We're asking students to think much more deeply than we had in the past. Continued work will focus on distinguishing main ideas from details, understanding how parts of the text fit together to convey ideas, and supporting ideas with the evidence. This information provides feedback as the reading specialist team dives deeply into district-wide curriculum work and begins to plan for professional development and coaching for the summer and for next year, and to better understand the increases in rigor and complexity that our students are called to navigate. Not only have these assessments been guiding important growth in ELA instruction as a district, they also provide teachers with a great deal of meaningful information for students. In the classroom, these assessments allow teachers to pinpoint precisely where students are at in their learning and to identify pathways for learning that will move them forward from there. An important step in ensuring that all students can reach their full potential. What we learn can inform both whole group and small group instruction, as well as planning for individualized student support. These assessments have given us a great deal of valuable baseline information, and we look forward to replicating the process in the future to continue to better guide our responsive practices and instruction. You can see this gives us so much more greater detail than a single score or a single data point. It tells us where we're going and what to work on. At both the district level and the classroom level, we will continue with a cycle of planning, implementing, collecting information from meaningful assessments and reflecting on it, making adjustments, and planning forward again for strong and meaningful instruction. Assessments such as these truly help us understand how our students are doing in relation to the standards and where they need to be, while also fostering equitable and responsive practices.
As we switch our focus to examining course grades at the secondary level, it is important to remember that many of the trends we are about to discuss were already in motion prior to the pandemic. The pandemic has brought many trends to light and into sharper focus, but it did not necessarily cause them. And it's important to keep this in mind as we work to contextualize this data. As we previously explored earlier this year, the percent of students who received an F in one or more courses did increase from the 2019 school year to the 2020-21 school year. The impact of that increase was not felt equally across all student groups. Students of color were 2.5 to 4 times more likely to receive an F in one or more courses compared to their peers who are white. Students of color also experienced a larger percent increase in course failure from the prior school year to the current school year. It is important to note that achievement gaps are not gaps in student knowledge, intelligence, or desire to learn. Achievement gaps are really equity gaps. They represent gaps in opportunity, gaps in instruction, gaps in rigor, gaps in welcoming classrooms, and gaps in high expectations for all learners. As we continue to dig deeper into our data, we hope to better understand the trends we are seeing so that they may help us to improve universal instruction for all students. Prior to the pandemic, high school students with disabilities were twice as likely to receive an F in one or more courses compared to students without disabilities. During the pandemic, however, students with disabilities were slightly less likely to receive an F compared to students without disabilities, and students with disabilities did not see as sharp of an increase in the likelihood of receiving an F compared to the prior school year. In our initial exploration around this, a few observations that may help explain this pattern have emerged. Many students with disabilities continue to receive direct special education support one-on-one or in small groups on asynchronous learning days. Students who may be easily distracted, struggle with attention, or struggle with emotional regulation may have experienced fewer of these challenges when in a virtual environment. And students with anxiety who may have difficulty attending school or who are often truant may have felt more comfortable attending school in a virtual environment as well. This is a wonderful opportunity to explore whether practices or supports that were utilized by our special education and student services team may be beneficial to all students. To truly understand trends in course failure rates, we must examine our secondary grade data at the course level. A deeper look into our high school English and ELA grade data shows higher course failure rates did not occur across the board, but tend to be concentrated in certain courses. For example, in English 10, an upward trend in the D's and F's was already present, while AP language and composition saw no impact from the pandemic at all. Moreover, the higher course failure rates are not necessarily a byproduct of the pandemic. As I just mentioned, in some courses, they may be a part of a larger trend that had already been in motion for several years. While the pandemic highlighted and in some cases worsened concerns that already existed, the root causes of higher course failure rates often existed pre-pandemic. Failure to consider this larger picture could lead us to select the wrong strategies for how we move forward. It is important to note that the pandemic did not impact all students equally, nor is it necessarily the reason for increasing equity gaps. Many of these trends existed pre-pandemic, which makes it difficult to tease out how much is related to the pandemic and how much is due to unaddressed structural and institutional inequities. In this English 10 data, we can see equity gaps were already present and increasing several years prior to the pandemic. In high school Algebra 1, we see a similar trend to high school English. An upward trend in course failure rates appears in the data several years before the pandemic began. The increase in course D's and F's for the 2020-21 school year is what we would have expected to see with or without the pandemic had the prior trend continued at the same year-to-year rate of increase. Equity gaps for our students of color were also increasing pre-pandemic as well. I would like to take a moment to revisit the idea of achievement gaps really representing resource and opportunity gaps. The district offers two opportunities for students to take Algebra 1. One opportunity allows students to take algebra in middle school, typically in the 8th grade. The second opportunity allows students to take algebra in high school, typically as freshmen. Between these two algebra pathways, there is a substantial difference in the number of instructional minutes students receive. Across 36 weeks of a school year, students who take algebra in high school receive approximately 2,556 fewer classroom instructional minutes compared to students who take algebra in middle school. In many ways, trends we see in high school are determined by decisions made in middle school.
Michelle, can you repeat that number?
2,556.
And can you explain, particularly for the folks who are watching who may not have middle schoolers and high schoolers, why that exists?
Why the difference in instructional minutes exists? Students in middle school each week receive more minutes of instructional time compared to students in high school. And then when we take that amount of time and then multiply it across 36 weeks of the school year, we come up with 2,556 instructional minutes for difference.
Is that because class periods are shorter because there's more class periods in high school than middle school?
Yes, I believe so. It was one of our instructional coaches or equity coaches who brought that to my attention as well.
I was an English major, so. Thank you.
As we move our discussion from high school data to middle school data, I would like to begin with middle school math. In middle school math, we tend to see a higher D and F rate in Math 6, Math 7, and Math 8 compared to our accelerated math courses. A higher than expected DF rate occurred in Math 8 this year compared to previous school years. However, the DF rate was not appreciably different in Math 6 or Math 7 this school year as compared to prior years. If we simulate a cohort of students moving from 6th to 7th to 8th grade over the course of 3 years' time, we observe another trend that we know existed pre-pandemic. Prior data analysis has shown a higher likelihood of not meeting proficiency standards by 8th grade in the standard math pathway as compared to the accelerated math pathway. We can also make a quick comparison between algebra taken in high school and algebra taken in middle school. The percent of students receiving a D or F in algebra is quite a bit higher when taken in high school as compared to when taken in middle school. In middle school ELA, there is mixed evidence for higher D and F rates this school year. We have implemented a new ELA course sequence this year, which makes it a bit difficult to compare this year's data to prior years. We will, of course, continue to monitor this data carefully. Middle school science did quite well given the challenges presented this school year. The overall DF rate has remained relatively low across middle school grade levels compared to other subject areas. In middle school social studies, we observed a downward trend in social studies 6 and a slightly upward trend in social studies 7. The course that catches my eye the most is US History 8. There has been a higher than expected DF rate in US History over the last 3 years. A similar pattern of higher than expected Ds and Fs has also occurred in Math 8 and ELA 8 as well. In future analyses, we will explore possible reasons for why 8th grade appears to be a consistent outlier.
Hello? Okay. Can you hear me? So we have some data to obviously study here in a couple of areas. So as we have mentioned a number of times already this evening, we are going to have a very intentional focus of continuous improvement in 3 of our core subject areas in middle school this summer. Those subject areas include English language arts, math, and social studies. We are regrounding ourselves in the standards that those 3 content areas are founded in by examining how they come to life with our current curricular resources. We will be studying the standards and our curricular resources to provide more concept-based learning opportunities that foster deep and more transferable connection to skills and content. This deep study of standards will allow for us to have purposeful conversations about our common assessments to provide greater alignment to the standards. We want to verify that we are teaching and assessing to the level of expectation of the standards. Instances in which we find that we are not, we will adjust our instructional and assessment practices to address the opportunity gaps that Michelle spoke of earlier.
Next, I would like to provide the board with an update on our statewide assessments for the 2020-21 school year. We officially finished our last statewide assessment on Friday. Yay! This was a challenging year for statewide assessment, but our district did an amazing job at assessing as many students as we could. It was a really wonderful example of teamwork. We anticipate receiving summative reports with our data in June, July, and August. I do want to remind you that data for some assessments will be embargoed and we cannot release it to the public until fall. DPI decides when that date will be, and we will find out closer to September when their official de-embargo date will be. I also want to give you an accountability update. The U.S. Department of Education approved a waiver for the state of Wisconsin that suspends some federal accountability requirements for the 2020-21 school year. This means that the 95% test participation rate will not be enforced this year, and ESSA will delay new comprehensive and targeted support identifications for 1 year. We will still receive our IDEA determinations, and state report cards also remain active for the 2020-21 school year. I would anticipate to see state report cards sometime around November, I think. Statewide assessment is only one small aspect of a bigger assessment picture within the district. Across the school year, assessment is a continuous, in-the-moment, multi-dimensional process that occurs every day in every classroom throughout the district. The foundation of our assessment practice is formative and summative classroom assessments. These assessments provide us with timely, relevant feedback that allows us to meaningfully shift our instructional approach and practice to ensure we are being responsive to the needs of all learners in the moments when it matters most. Another important element of assessment in the district is universal screening. Universal screeners are a forward monitoring process in that they help us to identify students who could possibly be at future risk for reading or math difficulties. Screening allows us to be responsive to students' instructional needs before they need intervention and allow us to fine-tune our universal practices, which benefits all students. If students do need intervention, we use progress monitoring assessments to monitor student progress over the course of the intervention. Intervention progress monitoring may occur over a few weeks, a few months, or span a school year depending on the student's individual needs. Statewide summative assessments are our most well-known assessments. These include Forward Exam, DLM, ACT Aspire, and ACT with Writing. These assessments occur annually in the spring, and they help us to monitor our growth from year to year. Finally, grades and practice standards are evaluated numerous times throughout the school year. Though we do not typically think of them as such, grades are a summative evaluation of students' mastery of learning targets and provide another important data point along our data journey. As we move forward, we would like to critically rethink the role of assessment and evaluation with the district to ensure we are creating a holistic learner profile that is unique to each student's educational journey. At the core of our learner profile is assessment, classroom work, grades, practice standards, and teacher observation. This data sits within a broader context of valuable information that helps us understand the unique learning journey of each of our students and what helps them to thrive. As we think about each student, we want to consider other helpful pieces of data, such as their sense of belonging and teacher support, student goal setting, exit tickets, classroom walkthroughs, student focus groups and thought exchanges, conferences, attendance, social emotional learning, and so much more. By embracing a profile of the whole learner, we can approach student data with a more deliberate equity mindset. Finally, in a bit of foreshadowing before I appear before you at the next board meeting, I would like to talk very briefly about universal screeners. So as you know, the district has used the MAP assessment for many years as our universal screener. And over time, MAP has increasingly failed to meet our needs for a strong, effective screening tool. After a great deal of thought and consideration, we would like to propose a new universal screener for the upcoming school year. The new screener was selected through a careful evaluation process that focused around 4 primary areas of need. When we're thinking about a universal screener and the type of data we need data that is more timely and flexible so that we can support students when it matters most. We need an assessment that measures both breadth and depth. It needs to meet the rigor that we expect both within the district and that we are seeing on our summative assessments statewide. We need data that can be easily drilled and explored. We need an assessment system that has reports that we can actually access the data. It's no good to collect data if you can't actually pull it up and really quickly use it in a meaningful way. And we need an assessment that is deeply student and instruction focused. And with our new universal screener, I am going to be very focused on keeping it very student and instruction driven. Most importantly, we want to reimagine our purpose and goals for assessment in the district. I really want assessment to be more purposeful, actionable, and equitable. Oops.
You already advanced me. Thank you, Michelle. Thanks so much to Michelle and to our coaches and reading specialists for sharing a little bit about what we've learned in terms of the data we've gathered this year. So the team touched on some of the actions a bit already in that data review, but we want to share a little bit more around these 6 buckets that we've identified to organize our planning and support going forward. So intentional planning and collaboration that's anchored by standards, relevant and responsive teaching that is meeting students where they are, strategic use of research-based strategies to design rigorous learning experiences for our students, reviewing, refining, and recalibrating around common summative assessments to drive our instruction, being really intentional about nurturing our culture of equity that's grounded in our core principles of teaching and learning, and then actively supporting the social and emotional learning needs of all of our students. So next, the team's going to share more about each one of these action areas.
All right, so I will start off by talking a little bit about our plan for learning, grounded by our standards. So during the 2017-2018 school year, we worked as a district to develop an instructional framework to provide a cohesive approach to daily instruction. This was a collaborative effort between administrators, teachers, and other instructional support staff. Initial drafts were presented at each school building for additional input and refinement. Starting with the 2018-2019 school year, the instructional framework has guided our lesson planning. During the flux of models of instruction this past year and a half, the instructional framework served as a guidepost on how to flex learning opportunities for students in order to maintain high-quality, rigorous instruction. As we move into the 2021-2022 school year, we look to continue to refine our practice and alignment to the framework by centering intentional lesson planning and reflection around it.
And as we already referenced, our work this summer and throughout next school year is really to continue using that cycle of continuous improvement, which again includes that thoughtful planning, that action and study, and being able to always adjust and act on what we are learning. This is to ensure that our instruction and curriculum foster that deep, relevant, and rich conceptual-based learning experience is again anchored in the standards, so it serves all of our students. There you go. A critical part of teaching and learning has always been and will continue to be on relevant and responsive instruction for every student. Relevant and responsive instruction is driven by assessments and happens when we know our students well. Deep relationships with our learners helps make this happen. When learning is relevant and we are responsive, we can make sure each student receives the skills, knowledge, tools, and habits necessary for their individual success. Relevant teaching is understanding each student's strengths to inform our instruction. It's about entering learning spaces with an asset-based lens. What can students do? Their strengths, their interests, and that their cultures are then represented in our instruction. In order to be responsive and know where our learners are, we must use data to drive instructional decisions. As you heard from Michelle and our coaches describe in great detail already, this data helps us know when there is a need to jump forward and who we jump forward with. Is it all students, some, a few? And where do we need to spend time reteaching? Which students require additional opportunities to practice or be retaught skills again until they solidify mastery?
A major focus of our work has been and continues to be to strengthen our multi-level systems of supports, also known as an MLSS system. Our MLSS system ensures the needs of all learners are addressed in the general education classroom. This includes, but it's not limited to, our students with disabilities, English language learners, or a student who may have experienced trauma. This MLSS system of supports helps us to identify individual goals and pathways to address needs within and beyond the classroom. It requires the use of data to monitor progress and revisit and revise students' goals. The system of support serves as a vehicle for educational equity for all of our students.
As I already mentioned, our instructional framework actually centers on student-centered learning experiences that require students to engage in complex thinking opportunities. To foster these rich learning experiences, teachers employ research-informed learning strategies in the areas of reading, writing, inquiry, collaboration, and organization. For example, at the elementary level prior to the pandemic, our teachers were utilizing a variety of inquiry, collaborative, and organizational strategies to promote student discourse in the area of mathematics. Through discourse, students co-construct new knowledge together while deepening their engagement and belonging in the classroom, and the teacher serves as the learning guide on the side. We remain committed to these practices that have proven to be so fruitful for student learning, with the intention of refining our instructional moves behind the strategies, as well as look to utilize these same practices in other content areas. Additionally, for the last 2 years, our high schools have been working on teaching students the organizational skill of purposeful note-taking. This learning explicitly teaches students how to make meaning of their thinking while reading, writing, or actively listening. Students are also then explicitly taught how to interrogate their notes, to make deeper connections and meaning. Moving into next year, we aim to continue to refine and extend these opportunities for students. Additionally, this year we have learned a lot about how to utilize technology to not only provide students with access to learning, but to enhance learning. With the assistance of technology, we have found a variety of ways to foster student collaboration in reading, writing, and inquiry-based opportunities that we aim to continue to leverage next year and beyond.
And as Michelle and our instructional coaches outlined earlier, a strong focus in teaching and learning is to enhance and provide sound assessment alignment across our system. This starts with ensuring multiple data points make up each student's learning profile, that we are reviewing many different assessments, both those formal and informal assessments, to understand each individual learner. This work also includes making sure common assessments allow students to express their understanding of instruction in multiple modalities. Additionally, with our focus on assessment alignment, we look to engage in deep collaborative reviews and refinement of our current assessments, making sure there is a strong alignment to the standards and that the assessments match the intended learning outcomes. These collaborative reviews include multiple stakeholders at the table engaging in that conversation, both general education teachers, special education teachers, coaches, administrators, and students services staff all coming together.
Additionally, during our early release time on Wednesdays and during common planning times, whether that be grade level or content area teams, these educators will calibrate on classroom data that is collected. The opportunity to review one another's data and calibrate on assessment measures will assist teachers in eliminating as much subjectivity and bias as possible in the evaluation and feedback process. This will help students receive the most appropriate grade and feedback to feed their learning forward. Through this process, teachers also receive reflective feedback on the instructional choices that they made to yield the data. Based on what the classroom data tells them, teachers will either respond by reteaching in a different way or move forward with additional skills or content. In other words, teachers will engage in their classroom-specific continuous improvement cycle, where they will study their data, act on or adjust their approach, plan for the new lesson based on what they need to act on or adjust, and then execute the lesson.
So the next action step is building an intentional culture for equity. And so that is really guided by 4 key main areas. The first being focusing our efforts on the core principles of teaching and learning. And so really looking intentionally at our district and building leadership practices. So identifying examples and non-examples of how those core principles show up in our practice, centering our focus with our staff on our why, which is equity and doing what's best for each and every kid. And then lastly, through really effective, intentional coaching and support for all of our students. In addition to what you see there, the questions that we ask are, how are those values and beliefs communicated in our buildings? How do you know the values and beliefs are shared among adults in your buildings? How are you assessing, monitoring, and nurturing our moral imperative of equity to ensure a strong culture in our organization and our buildings? And then lastly, what happens when those values and beliefs are violated in our buildings? How do we engage in corrective action plans, and how do we heal when a violation occurs? The second key area there are instructional practices. So making sure that we are engaging in asset-based practices that affirm and avail the identities of all of our students, their voices, and then the same thing goes for our teachers and educators as well. And then lastly, making sure that we are collaborating at really high levels to co-plan and co-serve for inclusive instruction and really good learning experiences for all of our kids. And then the last two areas there have been really high points for both Assistant Superintendent Cruz Farron and also Kwiatkowski, and looking at how do we engage in really effective hiring practices. And then lastly there, making sure our budgeting practices reflect our values and our principles, which are all centered on equity.
In regards to social and emotional learning, we have two broad mental health goals. The first is that we believe we can create safe, supportive, and equitable learning environments if we enhance staff capacity to support all students' social and emotional development. The second is that we believe we can increase the sense of belonging for all students and families if we intentionally spend time building relationships. We can begin by normalizing active listening, taking time to learn about experiences, concerns, and fears. As we've learned through the pandemic, we often do not know the extent of which trauma has impacted all of our students. Our goal is that by offering the broadest possible coverage, that this is not going to be seen as just another thing, and we're not going to overlook unintentionally any of our students. Our practices will allow us to prevent and mitigate the effects of trauma before they escalate and negatively impact our students' well-being and success in school. A common theme this evening is this is not new work for us. And one piece of data that I wanted to share was what we utilized from our 2019 YRBS. And in that report, 68% of our students who took it shared that they feel strongly, or that they agree, or they strongly agree that they belong in school, which is overall positive. Of our students who took the report, 11% said though they did not feel like they belonged at school, which is obviously an area of growth for us as well. How this really ties into mental health is that back in 2019, prior to the pandemic, 86% of our students who self-reported a mental health concern or need said that they do not feel like they belong in their school. As we've looked at, again, the beginning of our return to school, we anticipate that there will be continued needs to rise. As such, our real goal is to continue to support and work with our staff. And that really goes to our second bullet point on the emphasis of building confidence and working with the growth mindset. For our district, our plan is over the next 2 years to add 10 train-the-trainers from St. A's in the 7 essential ingredients of trauma-informed care. Primarily, those ads will be within our student services staff, adding training to that, as well as within our instructional equity coaches. We believe, again, as we said, that by doing so, it's going to help us to shift perspective in how we work with students, while also building capacity in our adults about how to develop adult to student and student to student relationships within their classroom. We've also realized within our district that this looks different from junior kindergarten to our senior year. And with having 16 different schools, the increased trainers will allow us to prioritize ways to increase that sense of belonging, but also to work about how do we implement SEL practices within our normal courses or times within the classroom. An example of that from this year that's really been prioritized is in the elementary school, utilization of the morning meeting in the second step curriculum that is regularly utilized. In middle school and high school, we want to take the work that we're doing within our advisory structure ensure and build in time and space, and also adult educator belief that they can veer off of content and to transfer that into their classrooms as well. The last part is really for us. We also know that this work doesn't happen in a vacuum. We've had a lot of very committed professionals within our teaching staff, and we know that for our students to do well, our adults need to be well, and that it's been a difficult year for them. And so our goal is that anything that we're looking at as far as a mental health goal for students, we also want to model and utilize those practices with our current staff. We want to work on coping skills, building resiliency, looking at supporting work and home balance as well, understanding that when our adults are in good places with their mental well-being, that ultimately is going to have a major impact on our students' experiences.
So in addition to the actions we outlined, we also have several other components that we still need to do a little work with. We are finalizing the facilitation of learning we've been engaged in all spring with our building administrators to support them in a process of continuous improvement as they begin to analyze their school-specific data this summer. So tonight we gave you kind of the systemic view. The schools need that opportunity to dig in and see what their realities were at the building level. After that, then we'll come back together and work them through a continuous improvement cycle. As part of the school perception survey this spring, we included a thought exchange question to gather feedback from staff around the needs to better execute our district equity plan. And so I believe that survey closes tomorrow. So we will spend some time synthesizing that feedback and use it to help us design the professional learning calendar for the coming school year, those days that we have off where we bring staff together and engage in learning. And then finally, we'll be working with Dr. Means as he transitions this summer to execute a system for continuous improvement, where we're examining and adjusting throughout the year to meet the needs of our students as we engage in a district data cycle.
All right, so bringing this home in closing, all of what you've heard tonight from Michelle, our wonderful instructional coaches, my fellow directors, is that everything we do has to reflect our moral imperative, and that's equity. And simply, that's doing what's best for each and every kid who comes across our doorways, who enter our district, and who leave us and go off into the community, into career fields, and also college. And so last year, this governing body decided to vote on and pass this particular plan around equity. And the key themes were opportunity, making sure everyone has access, including kids and families, belonging, increasing that sense of belonging, making sure that all of our kids and families feel like that school is also an extension of home for them. And then lastly, achievement. And what we mean by that is social and academic success. Does every kid have an opportunity to experience social and academic success? And so some key action steps were identified in that particular plan. And what you saw tonight were those actions sort of being realized and really guiding our intentional adult behaviors to answer that key question, which guides everything that we do. Everyone in this room, everyone in this district, and everyone in the Wauwatosa community. How do our actions reflect our moral imperative? And so what we reported on tonight is a plan and just a report and an update on how we're going to be fiercely focused on that moral imperative and do what's best for each and every kid.
Thank you. Appreciate everyone's efforts tonight. It's great to have you here with us. I'll open it up to board members. If there's any comments or questions you'd like to make.
Thanks.
Mr. Rowland.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very comprehensive report. It's good to see where we're at. It's great to see the great success of the elementary levels. I mean, that's like incredible, honestly, to see that success at the elementary level. Should be like tip of the cap to everybody at the elementary schools. That's just outstanding to see. So to everybody that's in an elementary school, like amazing. I mean, everybody amazing, but just those results are should be a relief to many people. I guess in terms of the presentation, I had a couple questions. In terms of the Algebra 1, I'll start there with the instructional minutes, with the difference between 8th grade and then 9th grade in high school. I heard that asserted as an issue, but then I guess I didn't hear it clarified as, and now we recommend something to shift that or make that different. Is there anything proposed that we're looking at, even in draft form, to change 2,500 instructional minutes?
Yeah, not at this time. I think we need to dig into that. And what does the instruction look like at the middle school level? How deep are they able to go with that, with those additional minutes? And so I think that's part of the study we want to do this summer as we're looking at that curriculum alignment to the standards and what we are using instructionally to make sure that kids are getting what they need both at the middle school and the high school. So it'll be a good study experience for us to be able to come back and potentially make a proposal for something in the future.
Okay. Let's see. For the universal screener, obviously it sounds like MAPS is not giving us what we need. I would love to hear more about the why it's not giving us what we need. Obviously pivoting from one existing tool that we have all sorts of legacy data, benchmarks, all that. If we moved to a new tool, would we be able to still benchmark against the old, or would that just sort of go away and we'd start fresh with new data? Somebody can explain that, that'd be awesome.
The benchmarks would be similar, but a little bit more rigorous. So in some ways it would be starting over. In other ways, it's an upgrade to business as usual.
And we intend to come to the June 14th board meeting with a presentation specifically around our recommendation for the universal screener, the process we use to evaluate tools, and exactly that, Mr. Rowland, why this is our recommendation, and we feel that it would help us better make instructional decisions to support student learning.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the hesitancy of just losing all of that historic data, that's a big thing to say nope, we're gonna move away from that and go to the student news. So I just hope that's a very compelling presentation. Are there any other data points that we've seen that might help us to explain the story in terms of absences or address changes or anything like that might help to explain the story of the year? I know there's one kid I know who's had to move 5 different times because of divorce and custody change and job loss and then job gain, and they moved every single time. Do we have any sense of if that was impactful for specific people or people than normal?
I think our attendance rates this year have held pretty well compared to prior years. We haven't actually looked at mobility for this year. That's something that we would typically start to look at after the year is closed. But from what we know of previous data analyses, mobility for students does impact their learning, or at least it is correlated to sometimes lower growth from fall to spring. And that can be whether it's within district moves between schools or inter-district between us and other districts. So yeah, that's definitely a factor. It can be a factor.
Yeah, I'd just be curious, right? We've all read in the news that domestic, incidents are on the rise, and just I'm sure that has an impact just overall. So I'd be curious if those external factors also are showing up in any of our data in a measurable way or a meaningful way.
I would think that I know that our schools are having those conversations as they're working with students and families, and so that would be part of those discussions that they're having when they're diving into that data this summer and taking a look at that. But that is part of the ongoing conversations that I know Student Services has been engaging in with the school-based teams to make sure that there's outreach to families who are struggling.
And my question on the training the trainers, it sounds interesting, this CNA program, Poland read really good things about it. My only question about that is just the rationale for why we would train the instructional coaches as opposed to hiring just more social workers or therapists or counselors, just to understand that. I'm sure it's more efficient probably to do the training versus hire a new person. Salary and benefits, was that pretty much it?
Yeah, that's been part of the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think it's a little bit of both. I think one of the ways we looked at it is how can we do the broadest level of coverage? Because we're within the budget not going to be able to necessarily add like a social worker to every school. I do want to compliment, I think, Dr. Ertl as well as Marta and Kristen for also recognizing that there were needs. And so we did increase, in fact, counseling FTEs at both middle schools so that they added a 0.5 where they will have 3 counselors at both middle schools for next year. We really thought, though, with our current partnership with St. A's, that it was work that our staff had already started. And so that how can we, on a more universal level, support our teachers in the classroom to bring out those 7 essential ingredients or aspects on a more consistent basis. Our staff, the feedback that I get within the student services team is that we're at that point where that's what people want. Help us to do better in these areas. We understand the why behind it. We want to build our skills and our capacity. And by adding more people to that team, it allows more intentional work to take place individually or within smaller groups.
Okay, that makes sense. Then my last question is, and maybe we don't know this yet, but do we know the data was all semester 1? Do we have a sense of how semester 2 is tracking? I know you won't have like 10th grade English off the top of your head, but in a general sense, do you have a sense of where that's headed? Like same trajectory, changing trajectory?
Once the semester closes, then we'll pull that data and rerun it in exactly the same way.
Yeah. It's not accurate enough for us at this point. We're not close enough to the end of the semester.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other board comments?
Yes, thank you. It's good to hear your report this evening. Really is. Thank you, team. I have a couple questions. One is around the data itself. So when I'm looking at the colors on the charts, am I making correlations to the same colors in the different charts? For example, not assessed, not met, met. And I think the answers is different in every chart.
I try to be consistent within groups of data. So among like the common assessment data, I try to use the same color theme. Within the practice standard data, I try to use a similar color theme.
So for example, we have slide 4 under elementary, and there's pink, yellow, green, and blue. I just want to make sure that I understand. That was elementary for whatever, elementary practice standard slide.
And the red is not yet met, 2 is somewhat met, 3 is mostly met, and blue or 4 is fully met.
Okay. So there's one, maybe I don't have the same slide. It's after the data, what do we collect? And maybe it's a little bit changed from what I'm looking at. I think it is. Okay.
The only thing that I really added was the arrows, and I did add a little bit of clarification to the
and it's a grade, well, I'm looking at a slide that says grade 5 math practice standards. Okay, it doesn't look like, it's just a bar graph. So I think maybe I don't have a current version in my attachment. So that's okay. The second thing I wanted to ask about is the intention. And I appreciate the notes on intention. And I was, for example, the intentions for elementary, the intentions for middle school, and the intentions for high school. Middle school, it was on our presentation that we decided on reading, math, and social studies. Why did we pick social studies? What's the link there?
Michelle, are you able to pull up that slide?
I am looking for it. Yep.
So we are going to take a study of social studies because the data was, we were asking a lot of questions when we were looking at the data. And so we need to ask some more questions as we continue to study the current scope and sequence. How is that aligned to our standards? What does instruction look like in our middle schools to be able to start putting together some opportunities for us to act and adjust to resolve these trends that we're seeing in the data. So that is why we are starting with social studies at this juncture rather than science at this point. That's not to say that we aren't going to touch science, but that will come later on. But we're going to look at social studies in the immediate future.
Okay, so just help me understand the logic. And we pick the subject based on the assessments, or we pick the subjects based on how they could integrate with all of the curriculum. These are just the questions that are coming to my mind. So and why I'm going in this direction is I'm not sure from this presentation what the intention for elementary is and what the intention for high school is. So I just want to make sure that when we're talking systemic change, that we understand the logic and we understand where we think we're going to have the most impact with the students in a short run and a long run. So that's just my general thinking. And then I guess, third area is touch points. So for me, a sense of urgency and the touch points available with the staff, with the students, with the parents, so we really can make an impact at the right time, at the right level for every student. Because that's what I heard in your presentation this evening, really making an impact for every student. So, so those are the questions that I have. Obviously, you can't answer them all tonight, but when you're going through the process and the plan, those are just the thoughts that were coming to me. And the board process is my final question. When will we come back to this important topic at the board? Give the admin and the team and the buildings a chance to come up with some of these strategies. When can we have this back? Because to me, this is an exciting conversation and a conversation we should always be having every day. But
absolutely, this is the stuff we want to be talking about. We're excited to be here tonight. So, Mrs. Muefeld, we're hoping to have opportunities 3 times next year to come to the board and give an update around our process of continuous improvement. That gives us that opportunity to meet with our building-based teams and to have them reflecting on and adjusting their plans, sharing out with us what's working, what they're needing to readjust. So that's our intention for next year. But we do want to have conversations with Dr. Means to make sure we're in alignment with what it is he's looking for us to be providing to you all as well.
Yeah, from my seat, I don't, want a lot of time to lapse. Let's get going. You have some wonderful experience. You have some wonderful data here. Let's just keep going.
Thank you.
Questions, Philip? Sure. I love that continuous improvement. It sounds like an agile methodology. What is the data cycle at the classroom level? What's the length of the data cycle at the classroom level? Is it a month that you come back around? Is it a week? I know you mentioned on Wednesdays. What is the length of that? Do we know?
It really,
Yeah.
it varies.
Okay.
It really varies. It's driven by different units in math. So that unit in math could, say, unit 1 could be 6 weeks in length, and thinking about, that end result, that common summative assessment at the end. But then I say that and also know that data is an ongoing cycle too. So we're collecting more of that informal, those exit tickets, those quick checks to constantly be looking at. So every Wednesday, teachers are pulling that during their co-planning, co-serving times. They're engaging in that as well. So I think it really, it varies, and the assessment varies in which teachers are looking at.
That's cool.
Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I know it's not like cookie cutter. And then how do those individual classroom data cycles like cross-pollinate or help inform peers? Like what we learned over here, how does that work? Yeah.
So I can answer that from a secondary perspective as well. So just like Mrs. Ebert was talking about, it varies depending upon the data that you're looking at. But so to answer your question, Mr. Phillips, teachers will often come together during their common planning time to look at those common summative assessments, to have those conversations of, oh, well, in my classroom, looks like my students didn't do as well on this particular question as your students did. What did you do during your instruction to yield that? And those conversations are happening during common planning time, during PLC time on the early release Wednesdays. And so we, for example, when I was talking about our having that dig into the standards and taking a look at our common summative assessments and making sure that we are in alignment to the standards. We want to really strengthen those conversations that are being brought to the table in our grade level or course-alike teams. So that's a lot of the work that's in front of us. And then our instruction is really guided by that instructional framework that was mentioned as well.
That's cool.
And we're continuing to try to figure out more ways for teachers to be able to collaborate, like cross content, vertically, one grade level to the next. And so we're looking at what our structure of early release collaboration might look like. We jumped into a little bit different model pre-pandemic, where we had teachers meeting every other week by a designated grade level or a content, and then 2 weeks where we said, the expectation is that we're collaborating, but as an educator and as a professional, what is it that you want to engage in, and who do you want to do that work with? And so we're trying to figure out how to continue to be nimble and flexible, so that teachers are using their professional judgment to determine what it is that they need for their students.
That's cool.
I will also add that, so Mrs. Bowers, Mr. Rogers, and I have been engaging with our 4 secondary buildings as well in some reflective conversations and pre-planning for next year. And one of the things that they've also identified that they want to either continue doing or bring back that they were doing pre-pandemic is peer observations and going into each other's classrooms. So that, again, is another opportunity for teachers to go into classrooms that, if I'm a math teacher, I might go into an English classroom, see what some of my colleagues are doing in English, and then have some reflective dialogue with my math team or the English teacher that I'm observing to see how that might transpire then into my classroom with students in my content area.
That's cool. And is there thought as to how those localized data loops or data exercises will inform the building and ultimately the district? You know what I mean? Like, right, there's all this stuff happening in the classroom. There's all these data cycles happening. How do we aggregate and pull those up to be part of the building, right? And then how do we then create that mechanism to that all become part of the district one? Yeah. I don't know if you thought about it.
We haven't. I'm going to add that to our next steps, though, because I love that thought. And yeah, I think bringing some structure to that would be really great.
Okay.
And that's why we have Michelle Anderson, too.
Yes.
No,
she probably has some data already percolating in her head.
We're just capturing so much, right? And
Yeah.
so much continuous improvement. And it would be a sore thing to have it just kind of fall into the ether, if you will. Yeah. So cool.
And then also, I'll just add on to that. I think, just looking at our coaches right here, I think they just add such value to our school-based leadership teams. They're in all of our classrooms and, walking in and out of buildings and thinking about what's happening in the 2nd grade classroom and how that transfers into 4th grade, and then sitting down in building-based leadership teams, being able to really engage in that dialogue. can't thank them enough for the work that they do every
That's a
single
huge
day.
resource. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Very nice. Thank you guys very much.
I've got a couple questions. So I'm curious as a board member, I love the kind of the shift to formative. As a board member, if we were 3 years down the road, what does success look like? What is the data? What is the information? What's the picture? And I'm intrigued by slide 25. Rethinking assessment and evaluation and pulling it back to the profile of the learner. The second part of this question is, as a parent, what do I get that lets me know how is my child learning, developing, and growing at the student level, both in certainly parent-teacher conferences, but ongoing? Like, how can I go in and look at how is my child learning? What can I do as a support mechanism to support their learning and growth? I don't think we want to necessarily create high pressure, meet your potential now. But how do we kind of create where there's partnership between teacher and school and resources? So as a parent, how do I know my two kids are learning and growing, and where are the areas where they're really thriving and where are the areas where they need some additional support? And I'm imagining this is a tool that I might look at to do that. And then as a board member, where we're not looking at the child level, but kind of the broader level. And I know MAP, I think, as I understand it, has often been used as a child level tool. And we got into the habit of using it as a district level tool.
Exactly.
But it kind of, because we didn't have other stuff. And I've always been really intrigued by the idea of, certainly we want to look at outcome. Are we hitting all the standards? Is a child ready to do meeting their potential? But I've always been intrigued by what is the growth? And if my child isn't consistently hitting their growth targets, and I will say there's been some teachers where other teachers, and it could be the teacher, it could be third grade, she was just angsty. So it's complex, right?
Sure.
So that's why my two dueling questions is, what does success look like at the child level? How do we leverage this complex picture, knowing the teachers don't magically have more time? So what pulls that, Mr. Phillips, your point is, I think, really well taken. How do we start to aggregate all this information and data into a picture, a really rich picture? And then at the district level, how do we know that we're really doing this successfully? Because I think a question we'll get is, how do we make sure every child is growing to meeting their potential? And parents really want all kids to be successful, but they really, really want their kids to be successful, right?
Of course.
So how do we hold both of those things? And as a district, we're pretty grounded in what our values are, and we want to make sure parents are along for the ride too. I don't know if that's a question or just I'd be interested when you all come back to talk about that and to do some thinking about that and say, what does success look like at the child level so that the parent is knowing and thinking about it, and as a board, kind of broader. I have a really micro question that someone can say, I punt, and this isn't the point of this presentation at all, but good golly, again, I almost was a high school English teacher, and then I wasn't. Slide 16, secondary grades, high school, semester 1, English 10. What happened in 2012-13 that we started getting better and better and better? And then what happened in 17 and 18 that we fell off a cliff?
I think that's a question that we've all been asking ourselves since we saw this data. And we'll have to pull our collective historical knowledge together.
I do have some wonderings if there's any correlation to the implementation of grading for learning. I think that's something we would want to dig into a little bit and ask some questions about.
Yeah. Okay. So at some point, an email would be fine, but if somebody has some deep thought there, I didn't know if curriculum changed or grading or anything else.
No, curriculum didn't change, but I do wonder about the grading for learning factor and the fidelity to that. I don't have an answer to that. I've been living in the elementary world for many years, so I got questions.
I think it relates to that. I also think grading is a monster to try to use to compare anything, because there's so, as much as we went through looking at grading for learning and trying to bring some objectivity to grading, there's still so much subjectivity, and it's hard to take it out. And when we do the PLCs and we have the collaboration, and you have a group of teachers, it might be the English 10 teachers, getting together and looking at assessments, there's a possibility their assessments might start looking a little bit differently and start steering toward not as many students being successful. To me, I look at this and say, we're clearly doing something wrong. And it's not improving. So it's either we're missing the boat on some type of instruction that we're assessing. I don't know, it's something we look into.
And I look at this and I was like, so grades are one piece, right? And from the post-secondary lens, more and more places are going away from standardized tests. I think there's some cons to that as well, particularly if students aren't performing well in terms of their grades. And I bet if we broke this out, we would see that the lower grades are also skewed towards students from low socioeconomic, diverse identities. And so I'm intrigued to find out, do our standardized test scores bolster this of saying, okay, our grading's doing worse, and when students are testing, they're also testing worse at some of these benchmarks. I don't know, but I'm intrigued by here. So, again, micro level, but I found it really curious.
That's a good question, and I would say we can't answer that right now with what we have, but historically, looking at data, there's a strong correlation between achievement data on standardized testing and also outputs with grades. And a lot of that has to do with the expectation gap that exists, the climate gap that exists, and then just the gaps in our systems in terms of how we are progressing kids through and how we're supporting kids in a variety of ways.
This is totally different than that, but I'm intrigued. At what point does technology, which would seem to have an effect on reading, and is that the age where suddenly kids at a certain age where reading really becomes key are not reading? Someone want to do a dissertation?
That's really deep.
It is deep, but I'm not switching my dissertation topic now.
So I don't know, but I between that and my fascination with middle school brain development and technology. So the only other thing I would say is I'm really, I think, excited, as several board members have talked about this. These are really big, important questions about kind of how do you maximize every kid's potential. I would love to kind of take a look at knowing that kids certainly have experienced a lot of trauma on the individual micro level, and then generationally have experienced a lot of trauma together, but in very different ways. Each kid is going to have their own story. So anything that we can kind of find out and talk about, what supports for socio-emotional learning, what does student motivation look like coming out of the pandemic? Are they motivated differently? Are they motivated in different challenges? And what are the things, what are the national stories that are unfolding to find out how do we, I don't want to say get kids back on track, but maybe like make sure that they've got a foundation of support underneath them. We are now fully aware, and I think the teachers who are in the classroom have always been fully aware, but I think society is aware in different ways of what we need to do to bolster kids in their support. And I was really glad to hear about what do we make sure that we can do to bolster staff. Everyone is tired, parents are tired, teachers are tired. And so what can we do to do those both things? Because we can't just do more, but what do we need to stop doing also that's not effective? I think will be an important consideration. But thanks, this is energizing and exciting, and look forward to these conversations going forward.
Thank you.
Any other board member comments, questions? I have a couple. So we talked, I think Dr. Chisbanger touched on a little bit, but the parental support and kind of improving that feedback loop. I know right, was it just a year ago we put into place Canvas? Or is that 2 years ago?
Just
One
this,
year ago?
yeah, just this year.
It's all
It hasn't even been a year, Mr.
It
Dolman.
hasn't even been a year.
It hasn't even been a year.
So I'm curious as we kind of come back to that topic, how we help our parents with that process. I think, I guess I'm speaking as a parent here. It's a challenge. I'm not sure I understand it. Dr. Justbinger asked the question, how do we know as parents how our students are doing? I'm not sure I have a good question or a good answer for that as a parent. I'm struggling with that a bit. I don't think that's the fault of anyone. I just think we need to do a little bit better. Assuming that's not just a Steve problem, but I'm not sure.
No, that's a conversation we're having. I think in every single meeting I've been in the last couple of days, we've talked about parents as partners and that true authentic partnership between school and home. So we appreciate hearing that and know that that's an area of focus that we want to have in the future with family engagement.
And I think part of it is our teachers were just trying to keep their head above water this year, right? And I don't know if they all have the same grasp of our different systems and how to use them. And I've had some conversations with teachers, don't even exactly understand what it looks like to me as a parent. They say, go out there and look at the grade. I send a screenshot and I say, here's what I see. Oh my gosh, I've never seen that view. I don't know what that means. So it's not by any means they're trying their best and trying to do it, but so some improvement there. So it's great you guys are talking about it. I think that's super important.
Mr. Dolman, as well as at the end of this family perception survey, there was a thought exchange in regards to that exact question. How can we better improve the way in which you receive communication? I can't remember the direct question right now, but I think being able to really dig into what families have to say and what kind of support we can really look to, I think that will be a nice first step in improving that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. And I think a big part of supporting our families is understanding our families are all coming from a different place, from a different background and things like that. So how are we equipping our teachers and our staff to have conversations in different contexts, right? Different cultural contexts, different socioeconomic contexts. All of those things are, it's a challenge as a teacher, especially if you're a teacher with one experience. You might not have the same experience. So just some thoughts there. And the last thing, I don't know that you'd have an answer tonight, but as you come back, I'm interested to understand more as we kind of look at this evaluation process and looking at grades, a different system potentially and things like that. What we're doing to account for bias in that system. How do we do that? What does that look like? One system's not better than the other, right? We know there's bias in testing systems. We know there's bias in teacher evaluation because we're all human. We all have bias. So how are we going to account for that? And what does that look like? So that was my other thought. And then I'm also, Mr. Rowland, brought it up, really interested in this minutes for the algebra thing and how we do that. Because if I'm trying to wrap my head around this, if I'm understanding, we track kids into a higher math, and then we give them more help. Well, it seems like that's reversed. We should be giving more minutes to kids that aren't in that higher math yet. And I know we all agree on that, but what does that look like? So kudos one for recognizing that as an issue and a problem. And if there's any others like that, but I'm super interested. I think, that's just one issue, but I think it's a little bit of a microcosm of how we look at education as a whole. So very interested in what you come back with to us.
I just wrote down here, algebra in 8th grade for all students, build-in supports. So I'll be handing this note to Dr. Means.
Dr. Ertl has our
But I seriously believe there's some merit that maybe it's a different discussion, but.
Well, and I think we often hear about tracking and how, kids should be in the higher grade basis, but when there's not equity around the tracking and what those students receive, that's a problem. So can't wait to see what Dr. Means' solution for this is. As I know he's giving me the evil eye from the back of the room.
Taking notes in the back.
Yeah. Can we bring him up to the solution? All right. Any other final board comments on the presentation tonight? All right.
I feel bad Leanne's not here because she would literally probably go on for about, it would take us another hour. But
I do believe she took the opportunity to correspond with folks before.
She did.
I don't know.
As you would have imagined.
It's always fun because she's such a teaching and learning expert. I was looking for questions.
Absolutely. All right. Any public comment on this teaching and learning item? Please step up to the microphone, give your name and address.
My name is Todd Dahlgren. I live at 1647 North 122nd. I'm here tonight to provide some thoughts on this topic. I view the achievement gap in Tulsa and across our country as a critical domestic issue. We are trending towards a minority-majority population. We cannot afford to get this wrong. We can't expect to maintain the life we have with significant portions of our minorities populations undereducated. It wasn't spoken here tonight, but there's concern among parents that relative to this topic and the information that was provided May 5th regarding white supremacy culture, that critical race theory is coming. I don't claim to be an expert on critical race theory. What I've read so far is concerning. In Virginia and California is that there are significant changes to math curriculum. As it relates to my profession as a product safety engineer, math saves your life. Math prevents you from being shocked every time you interact with a home appliance to touch a low voltage display that isolates line voltage powering that appliance. It prevents that appliance from getting too hot and burning your house down. It allows for safety controls to work properly to keep you safe from dumping unburned gas from your water heater or furnace into your home. I would hope that if this district moves towards the path of critical race theory, that you would provide ample opportunities for public input. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments from in the room? Please state your name and address.
Brandon Chronic, 4134 North 94th. On May 17th, I received an email from the Wauwatosa School District about the 2021 parent survey. 7 questions down, I'm asked what I identify as. The next question wants me to describe the races of my children. Well, I identify as American. I don't know about you guys. Now I start thinking, what does the district only want to know about races and identity of me and my children? I call the district and I'm told it's demographic use. So why are you only collecting some demographics and not all, like sex, income level, education level? What this tells me is the district is looking to divide the community into small groups and only listen to some and not all. Poor and needing help does not have a skin tone or race. Remember, all politicians, like they say, politicians always influence one way or the other, and somebody has already influenced your vote. And yes, the district has failed my children and the rest of the community's children, obviously, as well as we've seen. I don't know what's wrong with but with Met, was that like, what, 10%? That's not good. Thank you.
Any other comments from in the room, from the public? Jamie, do we have any online comments?
Yeah, we do have one hand raised, or 2 now. The first is somebody that's identified themselves with the initials LR. You have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Hi, this is Laura Ryan, 309 North 69th Street. Just wanted to share my excitement about this data. I'm not very well versed in understanding large quantities of data as you presented, but I really like the trend in or the research and how it's going with in the direction of equity and getting rid of the gaps. So thank you very much.
Thank you. You said one more, Jamie?
Yeah, there's one more. This person is identified with the name Kirsten. Kirsten, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Kirsten Dodelick, 2520 North 93rd Street. I take it you can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Perfect, thank you. I'm never quite sure with these virtual meetings. We should all be used to it by now, but still, technology. Good evening. Thank you for your time up front. And similar to Mr. Dahlgren, I wanted to speak about the in-service materials that were handed out on May 5th, which I guess are being used for potential plans to change our curriculums. Now, there's been a lot of presentations today with a lot of data. I don't know if this was used to influence the data you collected or vice versa. It was all rather complex, and I did my best to understand it and see my questions answered, but quite frankly, I'm not that much wiser. But what I did do, since English is my second language, I looked up the word equity, since that was the most used word this evening. And it is, according to the dictionary that I found on Google, the quality of being fair and impartial. And obviously, this being Wauwatosa, who doesn't want equity? We all want equal opportunity, and laws have been rewritten to guarantee those equal opportunities. But when I look at the handout from May 5th, it includes a 20-year-old article titled White Supremacy Culture. How does this title express the quality of being fair and impartial? Especially since 6 sentences in, the author acknowledges that these damaging characteristics are also demonstrated by people of color. So obviously, there's a desire to place race, one of the characteristics we simply cannot change, as focal point and sort of discredit one ethnic group. How is this supposed to create unity? Why focus on things that divide us rather than things that bring us together? So I think you need to be very open about how you are going to teach white supremacy culture and when. Because this influences conversations that I have with my child, and I'd really like to be informed about this ahead of time. I found it hard to find this information from May 5th. I find it hard to detect how you address this today. So I look forward to more transparency in the future regarding this issue. We can all constantly improve, but we will be stronger together and not divided. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jamie. Any other comments from online?
No, we have no more hands raised.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight. Greatly appreciated. Look forward to seeing you again. Superintendent action item, legislative advocacy committee representative appointment. It is recommended that the school board approve the president's appointment of 2 board members, Leanne Fraley and Eric Jessup Anger, as members of the legislative advocacy committee for a term of June 2021 through May 2022. And I so move. Yes.
I'll so move.
Thank you.
Just a point, I don't think the chair can move. So if you want to use Meyer's name.
Yes, Mr. Meyer moves. Mr. Rutland seconds.
I couldn't hear what happened in the room. I'm sorry.
You have officially moved Mr. Meyer, and Mr. Rollins, cycling off the Legislative Advocacy Committee, seconded in eagerness, I believe.
Thank you. And I would like to thank Mr. Rollins for all his work. I know he's done a lot of work for us on the Legislative Advocacy Committee, and we've seen some substantial improvements. So thank you very much for your work. It's not easy things to do.
Thank you.
And I look forward to Dr. Jessup Anger joining Ms. Fraley moving forward. I expect and know we will see great things. Any comments on this item? Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Dr. Jessica Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Mutheld? Yes. Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rowland?
Yes.
Mr. Dillman?
Yes. And that motion passes. Final public comment. Is there any further public comment on non-agenda items?
There are no hands raised virtually.
Thank you, Jamie. I don't see any in the room either. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So, second.
Thank you. Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Dr. Jessica Banger?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Ms. Mutheld? Yes. Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rowland?
Yes.
Mr. Dillman?
Yes, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.